First item on our agenda this evening is open forum. Open forum is any interested party's opportunity to address council on any topic of your choosing. Is there anybody signed up for open forum this evening? I'm seeing head shaking no. And then is there anybody online for open forum? And if you're online and would like to speak, if you could raise your hand or flag so that you could be unmuted. Is there anybody online? Nobody online.
There is 2 observers, but no one requesting to speak.
Very good. We will bring tonight's agenda back to council. We are in a workshop session tonight. Tonight is a working session of council. You will find us far more informal than we would be in a typical regular meeting. And anything that we discuss tonight that requires official action will come back before council on a regular agenda. So with that, we are happy to start off tonight with an update from Lake Center and Youth and Families. Christina, any opening comments?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, we just want to welcome Linda Matson here in her new role as Community Outreach Coordinator for Lake Center for Youth and Families. Included in your packet was the annual report from last year as well as a presentation. We aren't planning to pull it up tonight, but we invited Linda to come and give you a verbal update on what's been happening. So with that, I'll turn it over to her.
Welcome.
Thank you. Well, good evening, Mayor and council members and city staff. As was mentioned, the annual report and the participation and demographic data is in your packet. I am not going to go through that. I'll mention a few things from there. But as you look at that, if you have questions tonight, I'm happy to answer them or get the answers for you. Or if you look at it later and decide that you have some questions or want something explained, I am happy to do so. So feel free to contact me or ask this evening. First of all, I want to thank the City Council for considering last year and executing a 5-year commitment to Lake Center. It was very important to us to try to stabilize our budget. Every year, it feels like, especially in nonprofits, you kind of start over with grants, with going to municipalities, et cetera. So your actions last year were very much appreciated. And as I've gone to the municipality meetings last year, reminding people of when an increase had been given, and most of the time it was 2010. And so it had been a long time, not only for Forest Lake, but for other municipalities as well as the Chisago County and Washington County as well. So I just want to make sure that I thank you for that and that it is so appreciated and it really helps us in our planning. I do want to also mention that Chief Peterson has just finished his 2nd year as the board chair in March and has done a wonderful job of leading the organization. Prior to that, he was the chair-elect, I think for 4 years. And those were some difficult times, actually, as you think about all the different things that have happened, including COVID. And so just want to thank him for his leadership and his work. Also, Superintendent Steve Massey, who is here tonight, is a board member on Lake Center as well. Well, as I go around to municipalities, I always start with the story of how Lake Center got started. And you probably all know it, but I'm going to tell it anyway. And I'm going to tell it because it involves Jim Trudeau, who was the Forest Lake Police Chief and then later was the Washington County Sheriff. And in 1976, he realized that youth sometimes do things that they shouldn't do or they really need to think about. But should we ignore them or should we send them to court? And his thinking was there should be some middle ground, that they can talk that through with their parents, and then some decisions are made if they take classes, if they write an apology letter, et cetera. And if they do that successfully, then they don't go to court, but hopefully have learned some lessons. I think we have been successful in helping people understand that Lake Center is not a place for the bad kids to go. It is a place for kids that need to talk along with their parents, and I would invite all of us to think back on our junior high and high school years and to think about, is there anything that we might have done if we had been caught that we would have ended up in that intervention program? And I think we can all probably say yes. And so it is a great way to help kids and their families move ahead in a positive way. I'm going to jump to 2019 to the present, and we have done a lot of work updating handbooks, working on policies, working on procedures. We've done a lot with technology upgrades, and we hear about all the technology issues that many businesses are facing, and we are in that group as well. So we have done many things to make sure that the data that we handle is protected. During the pandemic, that was difficult for many organizations, including ours. We received 2 PPP loans that were forgiven, and I will say that I'm not sure Lake Center would have survived without those 2 loans. So we are very thankful for those. Another thing that we learned during the pandemic is, well, we had to move to virtual services. So counseling became virtual, intervention that I talked about became virtual, and enrichment did as well. Enrichment has gone back to in-person, and I'll talk about these in a little more detail. Intervention, the intervention program, we have contracts with Chisago County and with Washington County, and the Forest Lake Police Department can refer directly to us, and now the Wyoming Police Department can as well. And so we had to do this work virtually. When we were able to go back into in person, people said, we really like the virtual option. So 95% of our intervention work is done virtually. If families want to come in, we certainly will meet them in person, but that's what they're deciding to do. And also with counseling. Many people want to stick with virtual counseling just because of transportation, of their schedules, et cetera. So we offer counseling virtually in office, and also we have an interagency agreement with the Forest Lake School System, which we have had for years. With that, we had, most of you were familiar where our offices were in the old bakery in the Town Square building. And we had a lot of space, and it was filled before COVID. And then there were probably 3 of us that came in quite regularly, and we each could have had about 4 offices ourselves. And so we looked at that over a couple of years and decided, where do we want our assets? Do we want them in a building that really isn't full, or do we want to sell it and then have that money in the bank? And so we decided to sell. Fortunately, we listed it, had an offer for the asking price in 5 days, and were able to sell it. And we are now at the CLC, the Central Learning Center, through the work of Dr. Massey having that space that was open, and we're leasing that space, the main office space, at the CLC, or the old Central Junior High. So we're happy with that move, and I think it was a good financial move and business move for us. Just as a review, our revenue sources are grants, insurance reimbursement, as I've mentioned, county contracts, municipality agreements, events. I will mention that TASTE is coming up in April, charitable gaming, and then individual and business donations. We are working to keep salaries and benefits at the right level to attract and retain staff, like almost everyone is. And we work to stay engaged in the community and adjust our programming. As I've said, intervention has been with us since 1976 and continues, but the other programming changes based on what the needs are in the community. I will just briefly talk about the numbers that we have had in 2023. Enrichment, so there is a Youth First program that's part of a grant that is at 4 elementary schools in Chisago County, after school free programming. And we also have Safety Camp that's in Forest Lake in conjunction with the Forest Lake Police Department and other community members. Last year we had 115 clients for 673 sessions. So that was, all of these numbers are up from 2022. Intervention, we had 189 clients for 388 sessions. At Linwood Elementary, we have a prevention intervention program. We have a full-time staff member there through a grant that we've had now 2 sessions of it for 4 years. She goes in and works with kids kindergarten through sixth grade, and where there might be potential conflicts, so to speak. So in the lunchroom, on the bus, that sort of thing. And then in certain classrooms where she's directed either by the principal or the counselor. And she does a wonderful job there and has impacted or has worked with 252 Linwood Elementary students last year. And I will say that we reapplied for that grant. It was very competitive. And we had two-year $75,000 grants. And this year we were awarded $150,000 for 2 years. So we're thrilled with that. And then counseling, we had 214 clients for 2,878 sessions. Our youngest client is 3, and our oldest clients are in their 80s. We also do not turn anyone away for counseling if people cannot afford that. So we designate about $20,000 in our budget to help those that can't afford it or can't make the full payment. And that impacted 29 clients last year for 257 sessions. So a few numbers just to give you a sense of the impact that we have. And it's the Forest Lake School System, it's Chisago County, it's Washington County, it's part of Anoka, but it expands as you look at that data because of the virtual aspect. So, you know, we can be talking, you'll see some, as you look at that, you might say, well, you know, why are they coming from Taylor's Falls or St. Cloud or whatever? Well, it's mainly because virtually we're able to serve people. With that, I will ask if there are any questions that you may have or anything you want me to expand on.
Council, any questions that you may have? Any questions? I don't think we have any questions. We appreciate the update. Always great to hear. And you know, I know we're now in a 5-year cycle, but you know, as council talked about our relationship and our contract with Lake Center, you know, we recognize that we want to do our part to make you successful. And if moving to 5 years, and we've done some cost escalators as part of that. I think, you know, council is happy to support that, and just, you know, it's great to hear the update, and again, whatever we can do to kind of help provide some long-term stability, I think we're more than happy to do so. We appreciate the update.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for all your hard work
Thank
over the
you.
years.
Thank you. Our next item this evening is an update on the school resource officer, and Chief Peterson, I think you're walking us through this.
Yeah, Mayor and City Council members, good evening. What I have for you tonight is a discussion regarding our current school resource officer agreement between the City of Forest Lake on behalf of the Police Department and the Forest Lake School District. As you know, we currently have a 3-year agreement with the school district. It's 2022 to 2025. And with that agreement, we have 3 police officers that are assigned as school resource officers to the Forest Lake schools. 1 officer is assigned to the middle school, another officer is assigned to the community school, and then the 3rd officer is assigned to Forest Lake Area High School. The 2 school resource officers that are assigned to the middle school and the community school are assigned there during the school year, which is the 9 months. Approximately September until June. The 1 school resource officer who is assigned to the Forest Lake Area High School is there 12 months out of the year, during the school year, but also during summer months, so they could assist with summer school and also planning for security plans and those types of things throughout the year. The City of Forest Lake and the school district have had a very positive relationship over the years. The first SROs that I can find, the contracts with the school district go back to 1994. So quite a few years that we've had SROs in the schools. At the end of February, Superintendent Dr. Steve Massey, who's here with us, requested to meet with Christina and I to discuss the current school resource officer agreement and potentially looking at how it is set up, and more specifically, having the 2 school resource officers that are assigned during the school year, and then also the third one who was assigned all year round. There's been some funding concerns and things like that, just like everywhere, and the school district is no exception. And they're looking at different areas to help with cost savings. We were looking at, one of those options was to move that full year, 12-month school resource officer to a 9-month instead of the 12-month. This in turn would have some cost savings for the school. And I talked to Kevin, he looked at those numbers, and if it was reduced to 9-month position, it would reduce the district's cost by approximately $30,000, and then the city would have to absorb that. You know, we want to help out in any way we can. The school district, we have such a great positive relationship between both entities. And I looked at this option, and I feel it can be done. The two right now, SROs who are back on the street helping out with patrol during the summer months, and that's how we would utilize that third SRO as well. So my recommendation, staff recommendation, if this is decided upon, would be to use public safety aid funding to assist with that cost this year, and then possibly increase the tax levy for 2025 and going forward. And Dr. Massey is here in attendance to answer any questions or any clarification that you might need.
Thank you, Chief. Council, open it up. Any questions you may have, concerns? Chief, if you mentioned timing, I missed it. What is the expected, is it expected for this summer,
This summer.
2024? So
Correct.
effective essentially as soon as we can put a contract in place, is that the plan? Okay.
Question I had is just moving that 12-month SRO to a 9-month. I mean, obviously, they play an important role during those 3 months at the high school. What kind of a gap is that going to create, just from a safety side standpoint in planning and the things that they did in that capacity?
Well, from what I understand, a lot of the safety and security plans have been put in place recently, so those types of things wouldn't need to be worked on. And summer school, I don't know how many you have in attendance. 100? And we could assist by taking those calls for service if they come from the schools, from our regular patrol.
Is there a, so I'm just thinking about timing of this and our current staffing situation. Also, I'm thinking about summertime, and there's always a lot of, I think the vacation load is higher in the summer.
Yep.
Is it, are you factoring in savings of overtime in this number, or is this kind of a straight number of dollars that would need to be replaced?
That was not factored in, but it is looking at what we get currently reimbursed from the school district.
Fair.
But yes, there could be cost savings on our end in regards to the overtime and vacation, training, those types of things, yeah.
Don't need an exact number, but would you expect that be part of it, would be some reduced overtime? That
I would, yeah, I
reduce
would
that
think
a
so.
bit? Okay.
I don't think it's going to be substantial, but it could definitely be a few $1,000s.
And then, is there a thought longer term, is this I know it's hard to predict into the future, is this a stopgap for a number of years, or would we expect that this be kind of the going forward model for the foreseeable future? Is there any thought on what that looks like?
The agreement does go through the 2024-2025 school year, so we would definitely sit down and discuss going forward what that might look like with Dr. Massey.
One of my concerns, not a lot of extra police officers, in today's world. And so one of my concerns is if we wanted to go back to that model, just the heads up that that may take some advanced time of, yes, we're in a situation right now where we can absorb another officer on the street. Yes, there's some financial impact, but I think we're all, would look around and say there's certainly clearly a need for us to have an extra officer available. So in some ways, that timing is, in the short term, fortuitous for us. But if you wanted to go back to that model where that officer's leaving the street, that potentially could be a little harder to tackle to reverse out. So just, I think there's probably just some heads up and some advanced planning that might take. I
Understandable, yep.
feel like we are going to get 3 months beyond this, and we will absorb very quickly, and we will forget that. I think we will just find that extra officer is going to be very utilized, and it'll be just hard to imagine what things were like without that extra officer that was available. I don't know, other feedback or questions from council?
Just a couple thoughts. Obviously, this was set up for a reason. There was a need for someone at the high school 12 months out of the year, so it's unfortunate that has to go away, but I understand the funding thing. But, any efforts that the city can or police department to have some, extra patrol or be close to the high school during those, because there's a lot of activities all summer long there. So I think that would be important, just the general public safety of the students and the activities going on at the high school. That can still be a priority.
Definitely.
I mean, I would certainly support, I know we're not taking a vote tonight, but I'd definitely be in support of making the change.
Any concerns on going forward, or any additional information you'd like either Chief or Dr. Massey to bring back? I think it's just, I think my only concern is, if we wanted to go back to 12-month coverage, it's just having the time frame and the timeline to do that, to make that adjustment, again, just because those resources have been just really hard, challenging to recruit, hard to staff, and we haven't, we don't end up with a lot of extra officers, so. About that going forward, but again, that's not the ask today, and certainly I think very easily we'll be able to absorb another officer that's available, especially over the summer months, so. Dr. Massey, any other comments or thoughts you want us to think about?
Mayor and council, I actually got like 5 pages of notes, but you've covered all my topics. I certainly can answer any questions. If I could take just one moment though and reiterate what Chief Peterson shared. The model that we have with our SROs is replicated throughout the state. I don't know how many calls, Chief, you get during the year. I get a number of calls from my colleagues across the state wondering how we've established since 1994 such a positive relationship. Oftentimes, SROs are a cop in the corner, and that's the best you get in some districts. In our case, our SROs are based on a relationship first, connection with kids, certainly school security, and we all understand how critically important that is today. But just to illustrate the relationship that our SROs have with our students and our staff, you may not be aware, Chief, maybe you're not aware, but Officer Olstad will be our commencement speaker this year. And kids nominate those people. So again, through those relationships, connections happen. Kids have a resource, somebody they can go to, and oftentimes kids are going to our SROs not because of a legal matter or a criminal matter, but they just need support. So they play many, many functions and many roles. And I understand the concern of going from 12 months to 9 months, but our summer school enrollment is down a bit. Our enrollment overall is down a bit. We have far fewer incidents, and not that we have a lot throughout the year, but we just don't see a lot of incidents during summer school, and the ability to lean on patrol officers if we do, I think will be certainly sufficient.
Thank you. We appreciate the partnership.
Sure, thank you.
Council, anything further, other questions? Chief, anything else for us on this topic?
Nope, I will work with Christina and city attorney in regards to coming forward at a future city council meeting and probably bringing forward a resolution.
As we're pulling that forward, just one thing that comes to mind, just being very specific about the alignment of this funding and the funds that are available through the state for the law enforcement, the public safety funding, just making sure that we're clear on, here's the provision and in the funding regulations and how we're using it, just making sure that that's all aligned.
Will do.
So what I heard, Mayor, was, I was thinking about it, it's maybe the resolution or a contract amendment, whatever, would say any shortfall in wages for the police related to this would come from there, because you're saying maybe we wouldn't have as much overtime, so it may be less than this 29,000? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Well, a little bit that, and also just want to make sure that it's clearly covered, that what we're approving is clearly eligible for funding
Oh,
under.
yeah, for sure.
So, and just making that part of the resolution, just that clear that we have both the expense, but then also how that's being funded, so. All right. I think we can move on to our next agenda item, which is consideration of the Parks Commission ordinance. And Abby, I understand that, so you're, we did open forum at the beginning of the meeting, but I am happy to take some additional public comment if you'd like to provide. Is that the raised hand? Go ahead, Terry. And if you'd like, you're welcome to give comment now also if we've been more informal in our workshop sessions, and so if you want to provide some comment after our discussion as well.
Okay, thank you. That's why I put it down for doing it now instead of at the open forum in the beginning. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Terry Steenblock. I'm at 568 South Shore Drive, and I was the former commissioner of the Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission. And so I wanted to speak on behalf of what you'll be talking about this evening. So as the April 15th, 2024 memo from Abby Whitman addressed to Mayor Bain states, the city lost more than a quorum of former commissioners 18 months ago. The memo states that while it's likely there was a number of contributing factors, it's clear the previous system was not working for our citizen volunteers. Her memo goes on to talk about clearly defined roles and responsibilities for the commission and city staff to help create a better framework for the service area. Shortly after the commission resigned, you all revisited the park ordinance and made changes to it without any citizen or commission input. The fact that staff is wanting to look at it again reinforces the idea that the ordinance changes may have been premature, not well thought through, and did not incorporate the feedback of a citizen commission. I would like to go on record and read to you my resignation from the Parks Commission, so that's very clear as to why I resigned. I have also added a few contributing or additional statements to it because it's been so long since I have resigned. So I'll point those out to you as well. But while it's not appropriate for me to read the resignations of the other commission members, I can tell you that there was some consistency in our reason for resigning. So while I'm only sharing my resignation, again, there was some consistency from the other members. I am hoping that by reading my resignation, it will once and for all be clear as to why the resignation occurred, and there won't be any rumors or speculation. And my greatest hope is that it helps you recognize that what you are doing tonight feeds into some of the core issues that the commission had. Tonight, council has a memo that before you has a staff memo on the future of Parks and Recreation Commission. And while there has been no community involvement, once again, you are discussing it. You have an opportunity to learn from your past mistakes, and I hope after hearing why I resigned, you take pause of this work. With that, let me read you the resignation that I submitted in October of 2022 to Mayor Bain. Good afternoon. It is with mixed emotions that I ask you to accept this email as my resignation from the Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission. It has become abundantly clear that this commission is not needed. Over the course of the last year, I have watched as the meetings that were once interactive and an opportunity for the commission to weigh in and feel like we were adding value have disappeared. These meetings have now turned into staff updates and a constant reminder that we do not have a budget, nor do we have a voice. As I've reflected back over the course of the past couple of years, I've identified several things that I feel have changed and not only make it evident a commission is not needed, but they put the commission at risk and put us in a bad position. We started with the use of the COVID funds for the purchase/building of the clubhouse. That initial decision to purchase that building using COVID funds was made in a silo without commission input after the decision was made behind the scenes. While we remained relatively silent on that decision, the community did not. Our city manager had to know he was skating a fine line, and perhaps that's why we weren't consulted. What makes this even worse is that here we sit again a year and a half later with an unfinished clubhouse and no plan that has been shared with the commission as to what and when it will be finished, and no conversations about the interior and whether there will be opportunities for other park-related activities depending upon how the interior is designed. Again, this is my resignation from October of 2022. We've talked time and time again about the communication and transparency. We asked for a position to assist with communication and perhaps technology enhancements. There was eventually funds that were provided, but then that position was vacated and there was no backfill. Yet we see in the budget plans the request for more park maintenance and a park superintendent. Beyond this commission, the failure of the city to have a holistic communication strategy, community engagement, and transparency is beyond disappointing. We have decisions on the original plans of Belts, and we are waiting for an update, only to be told by the community members it was on the council agenda without any conversations with the commission first. What was so urgent that pushed this to the council meeting before providing us with an update and an opportunity to chime in? In addition, there were some specific things the commission articulated on several occasions, and then to have the plan come back with these things incorporated in a way that goes against what the commission decided with no explanation was disappointing, to say the least. Asking us to blindly approve park dedication fees, as we all understood, there had been changes in the process, and again, at that time, there were some changes, and we understood those changes. We were told last week that giving us the estimated budget amount could impact the city's ability to negotiate with a builder. If that's the case, perhaps the requests are coming before us prematurely. It makes me uncomfortable approving something that we have no knowledge of estimated dollar amounts and no follow-up after actual dollar amounts are received to know what the actual revenue was, especially when the new policy provides the ability for the city to use the fair market value or other relevant data. It makes it even more concerning after hearing Abby say at the October 18th meeting that we typically have a maintenance budget, but due to outstanding contract clauses that cost the city more than anticipated, where traditionally there is a maintenance budget available, there is not one. When asked by Commissioner Miller, wasn't there a maintenance item in the parks budget? And to have Abby say, yes, there is, but it's been uniquely used and they are reviewing how we keep using it in the future. Those kinds of statements cause heartburn as to what is happening with the budget. And again, blindly approving things is not fiscally prudent of this commission. We had a resident that came forward as part of the open forum early in the spring reporting an issue where he had asked for bushes to be trimmed, and unfortunately maintenance completely removed those with no communication. The resident now has people cutting across his front lawn on foot and bike. We had a discussion as a commission and asked for replacement, and there had been no action. We again made a motion that resulted in no action. We asked again at the last meeting, and we were told something would happen by fall. We asked again at the October 18th, 2022 meeting, and we were told we are an advisory committee and we can make a recommendation, but it's up to council, and that this item was not moved to council. We recognized that we were an advisory committee, but who chooses not to move things forward to council? Staff intentionally made that decision when it should have been moved forward to council. If we can't do anything to consider the feedback and the voice of our community members, then open forums should have been eliminated from these meetings. As I said during the meeting, if that's the case, perhaps we should tell people this is when they come, tell people when they come to our meetings that they should just be redirected to city council. The entire commission took a list of parks and reviewed them for maintenance and other issues. To hear this is being incorporated into a 10-year plan is ridiculous. Some of this was simple maintenance that shouldn't need to be incorporated into a 10-year plan, especially when there was specific budget dedicated to maintenance for parks. The maintenance of some of our parks is atrocious and shouldn't need a 10-year plan to make it happen. For the Your Boat Club contract, we were told the city is just going to have the contract extended for another year without any conversations with us ahead of time. At the meeting, we were told the city doesn't want to get into certain conversations at this point. This is just another example of not at least taking the commission along as part of the journey by having some of these conversations about agreements and such in a public meeting and providing us with an opportunity to at least understand what is happening, if nothing else. And the community itself deserves that as well. It is abundantly clear the work of this commission is just a formality that adds an investment in volunteer time and city staff that isn't necessary just to have updates. There have been very limited opportunities to bring us along in the process and leverage our passion for giving back our knowledge and our skills for more than just party planning. I strongly encourage you to eliminate the commission and save the staff the work of preparing for a meeting and the false hope of volunteers who think they can make a difference being on a commission that has no budget, with exception to the $50,000 we were given when other park maintenance budgets were added. And no voice. Again, as Abby stated in October, she reminded us that we are just an advisory body and the matter has not been brought forward to the commission. We recognize we were an advisory committee and that things need to go to council, but again, why is staff preventing our recommendations from moving to council? You can bring the commission back once you've decided to appropriately fund this important work and listen to the volunteer commission members. That was my resignation letter. I will close by saying what you are doing tonight further supports why some of us resigned. City staff is wanting to revamp park and recreations without any community involvement and input. Your former commission that resigned has offered to provide input and meet with you on several occasions to provide feedback as to why we resigned and what may be beneficial for future commissions, but nobody has taken us up on that offer. You revamped the ordinance once already without any commission feedback, and now you want to consider bringing it back again? But what we can use to help design what the future of Parks and Recreation looks like is a recommendation to the City Council. Before having this conversation, you could bring the commission back. You could create a new commission. You could be very clear with them that your duties and responsibilities are outlined in the ordinance, which was clear to us, which we understood, that there is no budget at this time, but we can, commission, use your help to help us design what the future of Parks and Recreation looks like and help us make a recommendation to the City Council before having this conversation. I think it's a complete failure on your part to have this conversation about the future of Parks and Recreation without any community involvement or a volunteer commission. And with that, I will sit back down. Thank you.
Abby, do you want to get started? I think you've got an outline for us to talk about tonight.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Bay and members of the council. I just want to thank you first for tabling this conversation from last week when I think all of us were tired. You've seen the staff memo. The presentation that I started last week was included in your packet as well. Could you please go to home? So my presentation was in the packet for you as kind of a get your mind thinking a little bit about this discussion topic. I will just note for the record, staff is not looking for major changes. What I'm looking for at the council's direction, you asked us to seat a new Parks and Recreation Commission to just make sure that we have properly aligned roles for those new volunteer members. This is a policy-based discussion. We seek direction from the council, and it's up to you to decide where we kind of go from here. I took out all of the history stuff, just wanted to just highlight the ordinance that's in effect. Just as a reminder, the ordinance was brought before you under different administration. Yes, that was me, but that was definitely a team approach between legal and our former administrator, Patrick Casey, and myself, to bring this forward to memorialize what are the activities that are occurring currently in the community, and to try to write that into ordinance. So the commission duties are outlined in here. They're advisory and assisting in staff. As I know in my staff memo, there is areas of this that feel problematic, specifically when it comes around events, because there are a number of changes that have kind of happened in the community with the increase of privately organized events, and specifically trying to understand the role this commission would play in those privately organized events within the community. I don't know if you want me to go through these, but I'm just kind of giving these high level. Staff duties in the ordinance were outlined as this division between community development, which encompasses parks programming, and public works, really separating those duties between that kind of programming and operations, and then the actual maintenance and development of the system. Commission management I included in here for reference of how some of our peer communities are actually managing their parks systems as a whole. Who's doing that work in the city staff level and guiding these commissions? We have kind of that two-department role right now. It's slightly uncommon. As communities get larger and similar in size to us, they either have standalone departments or departments that are kind of housed more in a public works facilities world. So I kind of reframed the presentation from the last time, just same questions, but really starting to understand that policy discussion of structures. So one of the things that I identified in my staff memo is the ordinance outlines a 7-member commission, 2 of those seats being reserved for members, 1 each from FLA and 1 from the Forest Lake Area School District. We have heard from our partner organizations that those 2 specific positions, or volunteer positions, would be a little bit more challenging to fill on a 3-year term. Just having a specific person from the school district that would be on the board for 3 years. One thing that staff is asking the council to consider is those be ex officio members, that they would still be welcome to come to our meetings, still participate in our discussions, but the actual commission does the work. The other would be whether or not you'd envision a single park system, managed by a single division in the future, and then whether or not that would encompass the senior center. I will say many, and I don't recall what I said at 9:45 last week. A lot of these questions are really to get this body thinking about the long-term policy for this division. You have a staffing study that says don't do anything right now until you figure out parks. But you've asked us to seat a new commission, and we're trying to move forward. And really the goal, more than anything out of tonight, is to make sure that the ordinance that we have is appropriately aligned so that when we're onboarding future volunteers, we can at least give them the best experience in understanding what their role is in this organization, as we probably will adapt and change over time. So I don't know, Mayor Bain, if you want to kind of go through these conversations, or questions, you want me to kind of run through them all and then have you folks just open it up for discussion? What would you prefer?
I think that's helpful. I think there's a lot of different topics here, and so maybe dialing in on some of the more specific questions helps to kind of tease out some initial information, and then I think we can open it up. This is, and I think maybe we need to preface this with, this is very much a chicken and egg conversation. What's going to happen first and what's going to happen next, and how is that perfectly aligned? There are some things that have already happened that we can't undo. We can't undo that we had a commission of quorum of commission members that have resigned. We can't undo that. We did recognize there was some immediate challenges with that in place park ordinance that we had. And when we passed that park ordinance, we passed it knowing that, and we even called it kind of the bridge to what's next. And knowing that that was a temporary ordinance. I think one of the awkward questions on the table right now is, do we have to change that before we take our next step? And we can get some feedback on that tonight. But there are a lot of moving pieces, and I don't think that there's anyone up here that doesn't want additional community format of feedback, which is why we are wanting to get this board reseated, and also get started with some kind of tactical things to work on that also allows to kind of help shape what should that structure be. And so I think it is perfectly fine if some of these questions, and this is kind of my introductory comment to this conversation, if some of these answers are, we don't know, I think that's probably the best answer that we can give, and that is perfectly fine, because we also have a lot of really smart people in this room and smart people in our community that we will figure it out, and we don't need all answers to be on the table before we just get started, from my perspective. So maybe let's walk through the detailed questions and kind of just leave room for where there's area that council has some strong opinions, let's certainly get that out there. And if there's other areas where we're a little like, maybe that's not the issue tonight, or maybe that's not as big of a concern, I would just put it out there. That's also okay. So.
Sure, not a problem. So moving on from kind of structure, city-sponsored events and programming, we started this conversation a little bit last week, and I think it just started to, it was hard to focus. Would the council like the new Parks and Recreation Commission to continue to plan and execute events? So right now we've got Spring Fling, Arts in the Park, and Hometown Holiday. I think we could also throw the Corn Feed in there, which happens to be on one of our Arts in the Park nights. Do you want to see them add more? Do you want them to do you want that less from this commission? And then do you want to see an increase at all in city-developed and or sponsored programming? So movies in the park, summer play days, some of those other things that some other kind of more the recreation component, programming components that you sometimes see in some municipal departments. And then lastly, privately organized events. Would the city council like the commission to review some or all public or private events? So this is really where there's gray area in the existing ordinance when it comes to events. So going back to those commission duties, if you don't mind me really quickly, that quality and variety of special public events and partnered recreation programs. And then when you look at staff duties, plan and execute special events for the city and coordinate applications for privately organized special events. The current ordinance really doesn't necessarily distinguish some of those publicly organized and sponsored events versus the privately organized sponsored events. As you've heard, we have about 35 public events that are happening, not, less than a handful are actually happening, are sponsored and organized by the city. But what role this new commission would help play in reviewing those, facilitating those, planning those, executing those sorts of things are questions that I'd ask you to consider. And I know the council last week had asked for some examples. So we did go through here private events on public lands. So something as simple as a wedding or a family reunion. Public events on private lands. We have Autumnwood Farms, the Lao Temple, Remax Block Party. Public events in our parks, trails, or open space, the 4th of July, the Twin City Powerboat races, Ragnar races. Then we have other public events on other public events on other public lands. So the 4th of July parade, Mallard Street Dance, Rotary Plunge. A lot of these things are happening adjacent to parks, but not always necessarily in parks. So the questions here would be, would the city council like the commission to be reviewing some or all public or private events? And then other information you'd like the council to just kind of state about events. Again, I agree with you, Mayor Bain. I don't know that there's answers to all of these questions tonight, but I think as we recruit and onboard volunteers to at least let them know the council is engaging in conversations most specifically around that events and programming aspect and their role, I think it's really going to help us better guide that commission, help guide that commission into on the right path in just preparing things like materials for discussions of work plans and making sure we're kind of putting some parameters in place for those discussions.
Council, open it up, feedback specific to events.
Start with the easy one, huh? You started with the easy one?
Start with the easy one. I have a couple of thoughts just to get us started. So I want to be clear that to me, there's a difference between what the council is doing or what the commission is doing and what staff is doing. And so I want to preface this by saying I'm very supportive of the city being involved in these events and ensuring their success. And this is where there's a tricky handoff between the commission and staff. And I would, because what I envision is certainly the commission is aware and certainly the commission is involved to some degree on soliciting feedback or providing some input. Certainly as they are out interacting with the community, they're gathering information and bringing that information back to the commission and back to staff, I think is just naturally part of the role. When it comes to individual events, I'm troubled by if there's a question of approval, if that's kind of the question, I'm troubled because I feel that we should have a policy that kind of guides, you know, here's what our policies are, and staff is best positioned to execute those policies. And I would say that the role of the commission or council, for that matter, is more on an exception basis. When something comes up with a request or there's a request for resources made that is just outside of that policy or unusual or a first time, that then certainly the commission is a sounding board in their advisory role. And as a council member, I would value that opinion. But I would look at that to be more of the exception rather than the rule. When I look at what's on the sheet right now, there are standard, there's standard activities that, with all respect, I understand is a lot of staff time to execute, but I'm not sure that there's a role for the commission or council unless there's a specific question, other than just, again, being a general sounding board and a general, not sounding board or kind of liaison to the community for feedback. It's just my thought, open to feedback.
Go back one slide to the actual questions on the table. Okay. If we're looking at these questions, that first one, I mean, I guess I would say, the answer is probably yes, but I'd like to get to the first question about plan and execute events, because we have some great events that I think the former commission or board were instrumental in their service and volunteerism. And our downtown plan called for more events in public spaces. And so this is where I know you shared a couple weeks ago, we were talking about the importance of getting this board seated, is that it would be wise to have a runway of workshops, joint workshops, so that we could all get onto the same page. And so while I wouldn't see any immediate changes to our programming, from an event standpoint, I would certainly expect that as things unfold, and we migrate towards that downtown plan that called for more activity, that this new Parks and Recreation Commission should absolutely be involved in that. That's my thoughts on the first question.
And is it more on the new and development rather than?
Well, in supporting current.
Yeah, okay.
Can I just offer an observation? So the downtown plan, as you said, calls for more events. I think the question here tonight, though, is it necessary for your Parks Commission to be the one who gets those more events? Or is that an PDA role? Is that a staff role? So it's not necessarily about that, but I would just, is that what you want your Parks Commission to be focusing their time on, as opposed to replacing equipment, developing new parks, recreation programming? So you may want it as a city, but really the question tonight is, do you think this falls in the Parks Commission? So I just want to maybe challenge you a little bit on that to make sure that that's the right place. When you know, not to say we don't want events, but is this the place that you want to, if their time is on events, something's going to give, right? And I think that's really what we're trying to get to, is some of the priorities for this Parks Commission. What do you see their role being? So.
Good point, and actually, I mean, I probably see that evolving. I mean, initially, yeah, it's probably more on potentially the maintenance side of things, but I mean, who owns these current events then? I mean, they were pretty involved, weren't they, with?
So the three that we're listing here, Spring Fling, Arts in the Park, and Hometown Holiday, have been coordinated with Parks Programming, so Jamie, with consultation with the Parks and Rec, or the former commission. Some of those other events, these are all privately organized events that in some way, shape, or form may have gone to the commission or the council because of some feature in those events, but traditionally weren't actually planned by city staff and the commission.
I think the tool that you're missing, in all honesty, is a lot of cities will have a special events ordinance separate from your Parks Commission. And yes, there are certain events every Parks Commission does. It's, you know, maybe 1, 2, or 3 of them like you have here. But it's those other events that is, in my opinion, in my observation, is not typical to run through a Parks Commission.
One thing I'm challenged by, and maybe this is part of where Councilmember Erickson is going, is part of where I'm challenged is I feel like it needs a home before council, right? So I feel like if there isn't a commission that has primary responsibility for it, it's coming direct to council, and I feel like that's where we run the risk of getting it wrong. And so while it might not be a big footprint of their work plan, I think it should be a part of it, or because again, if it's not running through Parks Commission, then again, we're kind of the first stop, and
Staff would be your first stop.
well, staff for sure, but then again, there's times when there's always close proximity breeds better communication and better awareness, and I feel like having that better awareness on the part of the Parks Commission it's been part of our tradition, and I think as a council, we benefit from having that feedback. Now, again, it may not be a big footprint in what their work plan looks like, but, certainly I think there's a tradition that is a very positive one of kind of being the sounding board for Arts in the Park and other large events that we've done, of what's gone well, what do we need to do. There's just some good value there that I'd hate to lose, and I think as council members, we benefit from having additional eyes and ears and, that bigger network.
How many times would they have to meet for event? It'd be almost out of hand. There's got to be some staff involvement in a situation like that. And so how often were you meeting before? Like once a month? So?
Oh, I don't know if he's,
Well, so Terry, you've come to the podium. I'm happy to take some additional comment, but I want us to get through a little bit of this conversation first, and so you're welcome to stay there, but.
I'll sit down and you can call me up, or I can talk now.
Well,
whichever you
I
prefer.
want us to get into just a little further along, and just get a good meeting flow of discussion items, and then I'm happy to take some additional comment, so.
Okay, I'll wait then.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Roberts.
can we go to the slide with the examples of the different events? So like when you look at this and you see private event, public land, is this a wedding or a family reunion in a park gazebo? Is that what that?
Some of them are gazebo rentals, yep. Most of the weddings and family reunions, I would say, happen in a facility, but they may be, it might, spill out into a larger portion of the park.
So I could see where this new Parks Commissioner Board comes up with the policies to have an event such as that in a gazebo or anywhere in the park. When you go public event, private land, I mean, as long as there, maybe there's they have to get a permit for amplified music or whatever, where that would just be through staff. I don't see where a Parks Commission would have to be involved in that. 4th of July, so these are different, so the powerboat races, that happens in the park. So maybe there is some feedback from a commission on that, or again, that policy is already in place to address an event like that. That's a larger event. We've done it a number of years. It's been very successful. Then you go to the 4th of July, the street dance. I was involved in the street dance. The city did a nice job. We worked strictly with Public Works on that to block off some space. We used the water treatment area, and I don't think that a Parks Board needs to be involved in that. So when you're breaking it down that way, if it's in a park, and yes, if it's maybe a new event, maybe you get that feedback, but have them work on what those policies are so that we're not having to meet it every time an event comes up. Oh, geez, are we okay with this? If it's a brand new event that's never come to the city, maybe another set of eyes on it is good to talk it through.
If you don't mind, Mayor Bain, I think that, Councilmember Roberts, I think those are great suggestions. I think we started a little over a year ago in starting conversations about special events and creating policy, and that had been delayed with just the number of vacancies we've had in the last year. I think this is a really good maybe workshop or workshop item, but also a work plan item that we can work in consultation both with the council and the future Parks Commission, because I do see a role. They've been involved, or the former commission was involved in at least reviewing some of these to see what the impact would be. I know that there have been times where staff has been kind of in the room and saying, oh my gosh, we've got 3 events that month. What is that impact going to be to Lakeside Park or resources? Being able to vet some of those things out with a commission, but not all of these, is I think very appropriate. So I don't know, I see a few heads nodding. I don't know if the entire commission agrees, but I do appreciate that approach, that maybe it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Then
Sounds like we could at least eliminate the ones that are not on parkland.
And to the question on whether or not there's city-sponsored events, I think those 3 key ones that are happening, I mean, when you think about Arts in the Park, I mean, what a crown jewel for the city. It really, really is. And that had to do a lot with Jamie O'Shea and that Park Commission over the years, that it's just continued to grow. The Hometown Holiday, that's gaining, I mean, I was down there last year. We were all down, I think down there and helped out, and we had beautiful weather, but what an amazing event. The Spring Fling, I think those things, if there's more appetite for that newly seated commission to take on a few, and if the council has that appetite to do so, I would be open to that. But to Christina's point on, if the downtown plan says we want more events, it doesn't have to be fully city-sponsored. Help out, be involved. If Public Works has to step in and close streets down, police department involved, that involvement, I think is just as important as having a board involved, but just seeing the engagement of having a board in the park that is seen, the corn feed's been brought up. I mean, that isn't a great event. You have most board members are out there, been volunteering for years, and it's just great to see that, and for the public to see it as well.
I think you brought up Arts in the Park, and I think that might be a good example of where the commission involvement is helpful. It's been quite some time because the entertainment has been very, very good, but there was an effort a number of years ago to just improve the quality of entertainment and the variety of entertainment. And so just getting that feedback, and that, again, commission members have a large network. What are you hearing? What are the most popular nights? What do we want to see more of? What do we want to see less of? Kind of getting that feedback and looping them into, they're not, I don't think, reviewing specific contracts, but providing that guidance and that sounding board, I just think has created a better event. So things like that, it's it is some level of involvement and, but it's more of, again, it's kind of providing that feedback based on what they hear and observe on those nights. Christina, it looks like you might have something.
All good discussion.
Yeah, I keep thinking like for these events, it'd be more of a bigger picture conversation and how do we move forward, what's going good, what's not going good. Instead of, I don't really picture it as like day-to-day things when it comes to these three events or just events in general. But I agree with Blake too on that other slide. That I think they should be more focused on public land events, private land not focused on that. And then I think like what you said, Mara, if it's a new big event, kind of focus on that as well.
Great. I think that this is all, I mean, this is really helpful. A lot of this are very standard of how we've been operating. I just know I've heard as we've been soliciting new applicants that there has been an increase in people that want to plan events. And we really want to make sure that we're not necessarily setting an unreasonable expectation for this new commission. I know I included in my slide here about just the word recreation, increased programming. I did hear from Councilmember Roberts, if there's more events or increased programming, having those conversations is important. We titled this commission the Parks and Recreation Commission. I think that's pretty standard, but it's not really a recreation commission. And the question really was, do we want to keep that name? Formerly it was Parks, Trails, and Lakes. I've always kind of revert back to that kind of. So since we're merging back into structure, the ordinance currently says 7-member commission, 3-year terms, 2 seats sitting available, 1 for FLA and 1 for the school district. So the question I would have for the council is whether or not you want to seat a 7-member commission. You want to have those specific seats, 2 of those, so 5 citizens, 1 from FLA, then 1 from the school district. Whether or not you want to have a 7-member commission with the 2 ex officio, or else a 5-member commission with 2 ex officio. I can say, I know Mayor Bain, Councilmember Husnick, both serve right now on the EDA, and Councilmember Roberts and Councilmember Erickson also formerly served on the EDA. The model in which we have in the EDA is a really nice model, at least from a staff perspective, that our partners are in the room and engaged in that dialogue and helping support those and inform those conversations. But really the general citizen members, the citizen commissions are making the decisions.
So, just a little bit of point of perspective. I went back and jotted down where we've been on this topic, and historically, well, previously, going back 5 years or so, we had our Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission. We had a FLA liaison who was a member of council. We had a Fenway Advisory Board. We had a senior center liaison, and we had a senior center board that was made up of senior center members. And there were times when getting all thoughts in the room as we were considering structural changes with FLA and the use of Fenway in particular, where it was just a very disjointed approach. And it was challenging to get, it was like we almost ended up in joint workshops because we were talking about one thing, and to have one thing with very limited staff, we only have a couple of staff, trying to then coordinate all of these pieces, and then at the top, you've got council trying to vote on all of these pieces. It was just very fragmented. And so as we thought about what was a better structure, I do, and whether they're a voting member or an ex officio member, and I can appreciate why ex officio might be better, having that common structure and having FLA and the school district in the room for those conversations, and it's all coming through Park Commission and then all going then to council, I think is more streamlined. And so I just wanted to give that context as to why we got there. Again, I don't have any strong opinions on if they're voting or ex officio, but I do think we would benefit from having the right people in the room at the right time rather than these fragmented commissions working on different things. So,
Size of the former commission.
7 members.
7. And I believe we had, I think at one time, so the Fenway Advisory Board was made up of 2 council members, staff, Parks Commission, at least 1 or 2 Parks Commission members, and then members from FLAW. And then we had a council liaison to FLAW, and then the senior center liaison as well. So lots of different people that were involved.
And when did that structure change? Is it
So,
5 years ago?
yeah, so when we stopped that structure when we put a pause on the Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission, just with the thought of, gosh, rather than being fragmented, let's kind of bring everybody back together. So that's when we stopped having the liaison positions and the Fenway Advisory Board. Also, the Fenway Advisory Board in its later years, my observation was it got to a spot where it was conversations that, staff would have the conversation first, and then it would go to Fenway Advisory Board, and then it would go to it would go to Parks Commission, it would go to council. It was just very repetitive. And let's be more streamlined and get all of the people in the room at the right time.
So, I think having those partners involved is very important. And I don't think they should be a voting member, but I also don't think they should take up 2 potential community members' seats. So, a 7-member commission, I know this gets to be a big group then, but a 7-member commission with those 2 as, non-voting members, the more feedback, the more eyes that people living in the community just seems to make sense. And then that part is, then they, FLAW or the school district, can decide whether or not to be involved in those meetings based if that's an agenda item. I mean, they don't have to attend every meeting. Nanette at the chamber doesn't attend every EDA meeting, only when it's pertinent to what she has, I understand
Agreed.
the group gets to be big, but I would hate to lose out two people's input in the
size as-
community.
That's the same size as the EDA, right? I think the EDA is 7 members plus ex officio.
And our planning commission is
And
7.
planning commission, so,
it's,
yeah.
it's
that's
a
fair.
normal size. It's not too big. So Mayor Bain, you do bring up the former advisory did include senior center representation. I didn't throw this in here as well. The DDA staffing study does kind of ask about the senior center as part of, your Parks and Recreation system. I don't know if the council has any thoughts on that right now, of whether or not you'd like to have an additional ex officio member of somebody from the senior center or not. We haven't really talked about it. I don't know that we necessarily have any strong feelings one way or another. I don't know if you want to seat this commission and we revisit that at a later time or not.
Thoughts on senior center? I think there's a question of does the park commission kind of have oversight of the senior center, kind of similar to events? Or is there some level of involvement with the senior center?
There really isn't, no.
There isn't any
There is-
involvement?
No.
Yeah, the question is it really necessary? It seems like a third well situation now, and I'm not sure parks would have to be.
I would say,
I guess the DDA study put it here under the recreation title.
Yeah.
If you wanted to be doing more recreational programming within the community, that it would bring in the senior center.
I like the idea of if we're sticking with Parks and Recreation, which I would prefer, then I would like to see the senior center, I think, stay under Parks. They do a lot of recreation and a lot of events. I know that they have, we've been getting emails for how the great work Jill has been doing over there, and people can rent the building out for different activities, graduations or parties, and then, of course, you can go to their like card games and whatnot. So if we envision it as Parks and Recreation, I think senior center should be under it.
Would say part of the work plan, I'm not sure it's a separate member, right? I'm not sure there's a separate member representative. I would see it as, certainly as there are topics to be discussed, then it comes at, then it certainly could go to the park commission, but I'm not sure it would be a separate dedicated, ex officio member. The one thing to note about the senior center is we're under, we've got the good fortune right now of having great staffing who's doing a great job. But I don't mean to put a but at the end of that. The risk of that is we have a person who's doing a great job, and we've had a situation where we also had a previous great person doing a great job who, chose to retire. And so it's going well until we have some sort of a staffing change. And so having, somebody who's, in this case, it's a commission that is having some familiarity, getting they understand basic operations, I think would be helpful in those times of transition, should whenever occur.
The one thing I
Little
can
depth of
say,
knowledge.
just for members of the council that isn't aware, with the EDA, we try to do, quarterly development reports, right? Like, the EDA is focused on building the tax base and all the things, but the EDA isn't always aware of all the nuts and bolts of what's going on in a planning and zoning office and applications coming through. Maybe what it is to start, we, ask Jill to maybe provide some sort of just update. What are some of the recreation activities that have been happening in the last 3 months or coming up in the next 3 months? Just for awareness, at least for right now, and then maybe we can, if there are staffing changes someday or something, we revisit this conversation. I know I have enough direction right now. I know that an ordinance amendment, a minor ordinance amendment, will need to come back before you to change the 7-member commission to remain a 7-member commission with 2 ex officio members, the one from FLA and the school district. We may just change a few words or put in a few descriptor words around our commission duties when it kind of comes to those special public events, to really just kind of help clarify that happening on public land, right, that are happening in the system, so that we can at least kind of put some parameters on those things. A lot of this will happen through our policy development processes. But maybe put in a couple words in there, and then I think I'll have that for you. It won't be next week. In a couple weeks. I would imagine we could have interviews scheduled for prospective applicants, probably mid-May, with maybe seating them recommendations early June. It would be our hope that the first couple meetings, we might be able to do some joint workshops between the council and this commission to do some good onboarding, some educational components, some of the stuff we're talking about right now, but then really to start leading into some of that, just what are we going to focus on the rest of this year, kind of getting us geared up for then subsequent years afterwards. So unless the council
I want to offer another idea that I think we had talked about, that we have a work plan in place when we seat them for the rest of this year. And then they would develop their work plan to come to you for approval for the next year. And a lot of it will be the onboarding, maybe require them to tour the parks. Jamie and I had kind of been talking about a few ideas, but I know, Mayor, at one point in time you had brought that up. And so maybe it starts out as some joint sessions, but really, I think in order to help set this commission up for success, especially if is going to be a lot of new members, let's have at least the rest of their year planned out, which is, only half the year by the time they're appointed. Is that still a direction you want to go, or do you just want to kind of take it as joint meetings with them?
I had forgotten that,
If
Christina, and I
I
had that
could,
conversation.
maybe both. I think some initial joint, there are some big items. I don't know if it was in your staff memo this time. We're just talking about, long-term park plan, and there's some just current state items that they will cover naturally as part of onboarding that I know as council, we would also benefit from. So just including us in some of those onboarding and some joint workshops, it's more of review, setting the stage, rather than digging into work, I think would be helpful for all of us, just to kind of come at or start with a kind of a common front door, if you will. And then I also like the idea, though, of, beyond those first couple of onboarding sessions, having, that work plan planned out, just, I think is also helpful.
I think what we could do is probably bring back, maybe even for just a brief discussion in May, hey, here's what we think we could possibly get done, June through December. Some of it's work plan, but some of it's a plan for what are some of those topic points that we're going to talk about, and where is the council and the commission really need to work hand in hand together with that. I will say, I think we have 5 applicants, I believe. May have been 6. I do know one former commissioner would still like to continue to serve. So we are continuing to accept applications. If you know anyone, send them our way or online.
So can I ask a question?
Please,
to
and
that?
I want to
Just-
give Terry an
Yeah,
opportunity as well.
so what, similar to when being on the planning commission liaison, being a liaison to that process, what does the process look to interview? Are you going to have some council involvement on that? I'm open either way. I'm not saying it has to. I'm just curious to see what the thought is on how we.
I envisioned, because I got the blessing of the council earlier this year when we were on, soliciting other applicants, Planning Commission, EDA, that we would we'd offer the same process that we did before, that the council liaison would interview with, at this point, I think it would, because we don't have a chair, be Mayor Bain. Now, that being said, you certainly can appoint 2 council members. Currently, the way the policy is written is that Mayor Bain makes the recommendations. I think that there's value in the interviews between, it would be Councilmember Valento and what would have been if there had been an existing chair. I think that there's some value in interviews that way, but it would be up to the council to decide. I assumed we'd have Councilmember Valento and Mayor Bain in those meetings, but I'll defer to the council, whatever you'd like.
And I'm happy to not be in those interviews. We can talk about some logistics here as we start thinking about scheduling and what that looks like. If I have opportunity to make the recommendation, then maybe it makes sense to have 2 others do the interview, but we can talk about logistics again when we're closer to that time. Terry, I want to give you another opportunity and before we kind of close out this conversation, and want to hear what's on your mind.
So I just wanted to, on the privately held events, the Parks Commission has never reviewed or weighed in on a privately held event that's not in the parks. And so I wanted to reinforce your
Yeah.
thoughts on that.
Yeah.
And that having them have some input, because people come to the commission and say, hey, did you know this is happening in the parks? Or, hey, tell us about this event. And if they're not involved in some way, shape, or form, they can't support you and the community. So I just wanted to make that. I love Christina's idea about planning it out for the rest of the year, and that gets back to, the ordinance tells them what they can do, but you're at least seating them and you're setting them up for success in that you're sharing with them, this is what's on the plate for the remainder of the year. And that way everybody knows what is going to be completed by the end of this year. There's no questions, whether council or anybody else, you're setting them up for success. So, and I would offer, again, all of the commissioners that have resigned have offered their feedback, their input, have offered to sit down with you as a group, and we will make that offer again. If you have questions about what's happened historically, what may be beneficial, we would be happy to meet with the new commission. We would be happy to meet with any of you. We would be happy to meet with city staff. So keep that in mind as you're moving forward, because all of us are passionate about this community and the people of this community. So we are available as a resource if you choose to utilize it.
Thank you. So we keep hearing this feedback about having a conversation with the resigned council members, and I have had an opportunity to speak with a couple, but this keeps coming up. And so I feel like Councilmember Valento as liaison and I should have that meeting. We should have that meeting, and it keeps coming up. And so, and it keeps coming up because I think there's information that needs to be shared and is certainly wanting to be shared. And so if you would, I think we should entertain that meeting and do that as part as we're thinking about kind of bringing the new park board on board. I haven't said, let's sit down prior to this, and I haven't addressed this publicly, but for a number of reasons. One, as you know, former Chair Steenbach shared tonight, the resignation letters were pretty specific. And so there was that level of specificity. And also, I just have respect for our commission members are volunteers and they're servants. And when you get to the spot of, I just need to be done, I want to be respectful of, I get it, you just want to be done. And I wanted to be respectful of that resignation. But every time we talk about this topic, somebody comes to the podium and says, I still want to be involved. I want to also be respectful of that. And so if there's information that should be shared, I think the two of us should sit down and just have that meeting. I don't think it's appropriate to do in a full public meeting and a full, quorum of council. And I think it's something that you and I can do, and we can certainly bring that feedback back to council. So you and I can talk about timing, and we'll certainly reach out. So thank you for being here tonight. Anything else before we move on from this topic?
Good. So then, this newly seated commission will help go through the process of deciding where Parks lands. Is it its own entity? Is it part of Public Works, or is that, where are we at of that? Because that
Good question.
is a big piece of this. Where does it land?
So great question. Who has thoughts? I have some thoughts. I just don't want to jump in with my thoughts. Christina, do you have some thoughts on?
Also, I think it's important that the council give direction on what those things should be so that you're not putting your Parks Commission in a difficult position. Commissions serve at the pleasure of the council, and it should be what you want. It should be, that structure should be decided by you, and they get to make recommendations back on parks-related stuff. I think, in my opinion, structure is a council decision, not the people who are going to be the structure, if that makes sense. It almost feels a little bit weird, a little bit of a conflict maybe or something, right? Depending on who those people are and what they might want to do. I would ask the councils, again, 50,000-foot level, what is it that you want to see out of your Parks Commission? And even from a structure standpoint Abby had a question in there, if it's 2 departments or 1 department and those different models, I think that's an important thing for the council to decide. No offense to any public comment, they're welcome to come and provide that feedback. But that would be my recommendation, is that decision and that leadership and vision needs to come from the 5 of you.
Thoughts on this topic?
I picture it with the size of our Parks Department now, and then with how big our 3 main events are, and I think with the growth of the downtown plan, wanting to do more events, and just seeing it hopefully get bigger, I envision it one day being its own department. For me, I think it being under Public Works is bizarre. I get the maintenance perspective, but when you throw in the recreation aspect, it just doesn't fit for me. Because I think maintenance and the Public Works side of it is just one aspect of it. And then when you're talking about the different aspects, it gets to be this bigger department. And so I think one day, I just picture it as its own department, especially if we want to emphasize our parks, if we want to keep growing our parks, if we want to keep growing and amending our events and making them as best that we can. I picture it to be bigger than what it is now. Not huge, but just growing.
I think as we sit today, it has to be 2 though, right? I mean, I'd love to hear if you disagree with that. and I mean to, in that they tag team that, that Public Works representative is attending the Parks Commission meetings along with our Park and Rec supervisor to make sure that you have both that recreational aspect of it and your maintenance aspect voice that is there at those meetings, not chasing things down afterwards. So I think there's that tweak, from my understanding, that hasn't been happening in the past, and I would recommend that be implemented with the new Parks Commission being seated.
I see this as an area where, for this point in time in the near term, I think this is more of the art of management rather than the science, and there's lots of different models that are going to work. This is an area where I feel that what's going to work for us is what's going to work based off of kind of leadership of new city administrator and kind of the recommendation from staff. This is an area where I feel strongly in the, I don't know what's the best model for us right now. I can see the pros and cons. I can see the challenges currently. But this is an area where I feel very inequipped to say, yes, we need to have this model. I feel like the best model for us is going to be the best model that our, great staff are going to work in, and that's hard to project from where we sit, from my perspective. How's that for an I don't know?
Like a great segue to the next item.
That
Mayor.
is.
Not to cut off any parks.
Any other topics on parks before we talk about long-range staffing plan? All right, let's take that segue. Christina.
So Mayor and Council, some of you may recall seeing a long-range staffing plan back in 2021. I reviewed that briefly. That was a plan through 2040. What you have before you tonight is just looking out at the next 10 years of staffing needs, and the purpose of that is to align with your long-term financial management plan. You did a lot of work last year on projecting operations and capital and other needs, but I'm not sure that you dove real deep into the staffing part of it. And so we want to start, this is kind of that first big kickoff of the budget components that Kevin had laid out in the last council meeting when you talked about the budget calendar. So a little different, again, because it's only 10 years, not out to 2040, but I wanted to include some numbers from the Met Council about growth. And before you know it, you're going to be starting your 2050 comp plan process. And so they've released back in January already the forecast numbers for that. And so that will help us to project out. And when I could do a quick comparison of the 2050 forecast compared to the 2040 forecast, it looks like you're not projected to grow quite as fast on the population side, but a little bit faster on the job side, which I thought was interesting and maybe a reflection of a lot of the focus that the city has put into economic development over the past few years. But that's just a guess on my part. And there's a lot of different sources that you can use when you're looking at demographics, right? There's the Met Council stuff, the census comes out, Maxfield does some stuff I know with the county CDA. I purposely use this because it's easiest to compare when you use the same source. And so sometimes you'll see in reports that there's a US Census number. That number it doesn't always jive with Met Council's number. The Star Tribune did a big story about it a couple years ago, but just their methodology is different. So for that purpose, that's why I use the Met Council numbers so that we have those comparisons going forward. And so tonight, again, kind of a high-level introduction, but we want to hear what questions you have about the positions we've proposed. Give us any feedback that you have about providing them in the long-range financial management plan. Unless we hear other direction tonight, the next step will be for Kevin to share this with Ellers and incorporate it into our long-range financial management plan. And if it all seems really overwhelming, please at least focus on the 2025 positions, because I understand that it can be a lot. So I won't go through every position unless you want me to, but I will just kind of touch on each department and their asks. So the administration department is a significant change from the plan in 2021 that just asked for an HR generalist. As you know, we had conversations earlier this year about the reorganization of the administration department and putting HR into the administrative services director role. And these three positions too are really going to be dependent upon the direction council wants to go. So the first one, the management analyst, would be a position to kind of help do some of that research stuff when we get to the next agenda item. And if you looked at your spreadsheet last week and the 28 items already that we've got in 3 months, you know, we can't keep up with that with our current staffing. So if the council wants to continue down that road, we're gonna need some help, and this is kind of a researcher role, if you will, analyst role. If you're somehow able to trim that down or be patient or however we manage that, maybe you don't need to add this position in 2026. So there's no positions in admin requested for 2025 too, so you have some time to think about all of these. The next one flows, I think, really well from our parks discussion. So communications, and then I put in parentheses, maybe it's an events coordinator. And again, a lot of this will depend upon what the city expects from a communications perspective. We are so excited to have Jolene start today as our city clerk, and we've already talked a lot about her taking over the communications role. We will bring a council item forward about whether or not we should continue our contract with Peachy or if we should bring that in-house. I think where we sit today, if the expectations were to remain the same, I think your city clerk can do those functions. May not be the fancy graphic design stuff that Peachy does, and that's a discussion that you'll have to, you know, have if you want to continue that. But if you want to expand communications, if you want to expand events and do more of them in the future, we're going to need to add a position. And so this is really a placeholder for that discussion. An events coordinator, I put in administration because a lot of times in cities, when you have a special events ordinance, it's your city clerk who works with all of your other department heads, police, fire, public works, and processes those. That was kind of why I pushed back a little bit on the previous discussion about about events. Park events certainly within the commission, but if there's those other events, that perhaps administration is the best place for that to be housed. And then the last one in 2030, again, really a placeholder depending upon growth, and some of the DDA study conversations was that there was this need for more administrative support. There wasn't a cohesive, or it could be challenging at the front desk. I think that Angela in the finance department does an amazing job right now and always smiles and tons of compliments, so I'm not looking to take her away until Kevin tells me she's overwhelmed and we got to move her away from that. And so these are really longer term ones for the administration department and new. The next one that we looked at is the community, and perhaps calling it community and economic development department, again, to have that emphasis on economic development. Last year you were asked, what was the title? Planning and EDA supervisor. Abby and I talked through this, and I think a planning manager is a more appropriate title for that. It would be that second in command in the department, and helps tackle some of these projects that are going on to help free up her time to focus on economic development and do some of that policy stuff. This also assumes through the DDA study, there was the recommendation that the building inspections department be moved under community development. So your org chart, if you will, would have your community development director, your planning manager, and all your planning and zoning folks. And then you'd have your building official and all your inspectors, permit tech and whatnot, kind of splitting it off, but still then in one department to work together on things. Code enforcement officer, I pushed back to 2028. I think with that planning manager developing some programming for code enforcement, that's not an immediate need in my opinion. We can certainly talk about that. I know you've had a lot of conversations over the last year about that, but I prioritize the planning manager role for this department over the code enforcement officer. And then again, further down the road, depending on growth, there may need to be a community development specialist to help with that workload. Fire department, I think those of you on the Joint Fire Board heard this a month ago, and some of you on when we talked about the SAFER grant, excuse me, the training captain is the top priority for them for next year. We will put it in there as a placeholder, and if we don't get that grant in August or September, we will budget as if we don't get the grant. If we do, then you can make that decision about whether you keep it in there or take it out. And then in a couple years, having another full-time position there, which would be the fire marshal and fire inspector, to get that fire inspection program rolling again. Sorry, I'm going really fast. I don't mean if to ignore the other department heads here if they have something to add in. Police Department, my top recommendation for them next year is community service officers. I know you've heard this before. To me, it helps in a number of ways. It helps get people in the pipeline for the recruitment, as we've been hearing, are starting to be a challenge. They can do some of those lower level nuisance things as well, and at lower level calls that not only reduces the call volume for your patrol officers, but maybe while they're out, they're snapping the pictures of the advertising signs in the right of way or the tall grass or something like that, and really trying to hit on a lot of those needs across the city, which is why I prioritize that. The chief would also like another administrative assistant. We put it in there for part-time next year. Again, if we only gave them one, I would prioritize the community service officers. Because I know we have limited funds, but we threw it out here in case, suddenly we have funding for everything. Patrol sergeants, you'll see there's
She
6.
can't even say it with a straight face, chief.
We're gonna have that public safety dollar spent over and over,
Yeah.
I think. We also have some placeholders in here for, I'm sorry, the next one is a patrol sergeant to add in 2026. And just so that we can have 24/7 coverage for sergeants when folks are on vacation or are out of the office for other reasons. The next one is a big ask of 6 patrol officers over the next 10 years, 2 in each year identified there. I'm not going to say anything more about that. A second captain position. I know you had some conversations briefly about this last fall, but the idea would be to have 2 captains, one that kind of oversees patrol and one that oversees administration and the detectives. And then again, future down the road, 2032, an office manager. Just again, if there's the growth in staff with another administrative assistant, growth with calls, that you would need to have somebody overseeing them so that you're not taking time away from your sergeants. We're almost done. Public Works, I think, is the last one. So the top ask for Public Works for next year is a utilities superintendent. And if you looked ahead to the financial impact, this is the one that saves money in a number of funds, with the exception of the water fund. But it saves funds because it would replace the stormwater tech position that you approved this year that we have not recruited for and filled. And it would replace one of the utilities foreman positions, so that you currently have 2, you would go down to 1. But it would add this higher level oversight that's needed. Utilities just continue to get more and more complex with all the regulations that are coming down from the state and feds. And I think I agree with Dave that you need to have somebody at a higher management level to make sure that those requirements are being met. Due to growth as well, over the next 10 years, there's 3 maintenance equipment operators. The one in 2026 will be needed because you're adding another plow route. So the other ones may be adjusted depending upon growth, but we know with the recent development, particularly with the number of trails in the city, that you'll need to add a plow route in 2026. And so you typically staff for your winter needs, and then you use your seasonals in the summer for Public Works. And so that's why I say that the plow route is driving that need. The Public Works Department is also seeking an administrative assistant. They don't have one now. It was in the DDA study. However, they don't have space for one now, and so the timing is contingent upon when the new Public Works facility is built. We are estimating optimistically that would be 2028 that we would be in there. Similarly, with moving into the new facility, there would be a mechanic position added, and this would help bring some of the work in-house for the police department and fire department that's currently being contracted out. And so there could be some savings there if we could add another mechanic, and we have the space. We don't currently have the space to be able to do that. Next, there's a couple of utility maintenance and equipment operators. Those are a few years out, again, just dependent upon growth. And lastly, a streets superintendent position way out there in 2030, but we wanted to have a placeholder in there. We may or may not, revisit that whole park superintendent position depending upon where you go, but I didn't feel like we had good enough direction when we drafted the staff report to include that. So again, the fiscal impact there, our first focus is just mainly on 2025, because I really want to hear back from you at least on those positions. And this is the 4 recommended positions that I noted, so it does not include the part-time administrative assistant for the police department. I picked the top ones for each department. You may notice that there was nothing for finance. Finance is set for the next 10 years as well, so I forgot to mention that. I didn't put a big goose egg under finance department, but they're set. And then I just threw in again, we talked about this when we talked about public safety funding a couple months ago. We really think that community service officer positions, 2 part-time positions, are good for all of those reasons that I mentioned before. If there are concerns from a levy standpoint, perhaps use the public safety dollars to ease those positions in. So the first year it covers 75% of those costs, the next year is 50%, then 25%, and then in their 4th year they would be fully covered by the levy, but that allows you time for growth in the community to help absorb those costs. And with that, I think unless any of the other department heads have anything to add, we will open it up for discussion, questions, direction from council.
Thank you, Christina. Christina, before we jump further, you and I have had a conversation about the Ellers financial model and some enhancements that may be provided to council for the 10-year plan, specifically on the revenue side. Can you just give a kind of an overview of what that looks like? Just as we're talking about expenses, it's helpful to see what's happening with revenue modeling and.
Yeah, so another thing that we discovered that Ellers also made a presentation back in 2021. So any of you that might remember that it was March of 2021, right? 21 or 20, where they had this plan. And so we're just updating it and how it differs from what you had last year. In your 10-year plan in a couple ways, and Kevin will help me if I forget anything, but on the revenue side, it will include growth projections. So if you just look at your levy increasing, as a growing community, of course your levy is going to increase, right? You're going to have more roads to plow, you might need more parks, you're going to need more police officers and all these things. But you're going to have growth there to support that, increased tax base to support that. And so at the bottom side then, once you've got all those revenue stuff in there from that standpoint, expenses, which again, you had a really good start with your projecting out your operations and your capital, and now you'll have new staffing, your debt levies, all of those things going out. But then you get down to the very bottom of it, and it will tell you the actual dollar impact on your average home over all of those years. And I've found that that's more helpful in talking to folks rather than the levy. The levy might increase 40%, but that doesn't mean your taxes are going to go up 40%, right? Because you've got new growth coming in there. It might go up, I don't know, 13% or something. You know what I mean? So my opinion, or my thought, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really about what is that impact to the median home. It's only one line. I know when Kevin does the budget, he can give you a bunch of different housing values and whatnot, but from a long range plan, all those things projected out 10 years, take your median home value and see what happens to that median home value, how much median home, how much they're paying. So there will be assumptions in there about their increase of their property there as well, right? Because we all hope that our property values continue to increase until we have to pay taxes. We love it when we sell, but so I think in that way, so again, Mayor and Councilmember Valento and Councilmember Husnick, you may remember this from 2021, so it will be very similar to that, but I think key important additions from what you saw last year, so.
I wanted to point that out because every time we're looking at like projected, expenses over a 10-year timeline, I automatically start plugging these numbers into our 10-year plan, and it's been helpful to just think about that. Yes, it's helpful to have that expense identification and slotted by year, but also to have when we're looking at what is the impact to that bottom line levy, to have a more mature revenue forecast is also helpful. And so I think it would be good to see that presentation and good to know that that's coming, because I just think it makes some of these decisions a little bit more palatable, or a little bit easier to think about, that there are ways for all of the pieces in this puzzle to fit. So.
And going forward, I would expect that you would see that long-range financial management plan every year, right? And so just like your operating budget where you can change things, we may sit here this year and have our growth projections and either the economy goes up or the economy goes down, and you adjust that. And similarly, then you might, a lot of these positions I mentioned were related to growth, right? So that gives you that kind of snapshot where you see all those things. And if growth isn't happening, you might push out, an extra patrol officer a couple of years. Or if it's going faster than we had expected, you might need to push it up on the timeline. And so I hope that it will be a really good tool for the council in that way, to have everything on one. I mean, there's a lot of tabs behind the spreadsheet, but we can narrow it down so that it's all on one sheet for you to see things at a high level and know what those impacts are. So
I don't mean
that's
to-
me geeking out on finance.
And I don't mean to pull us too far off of the question at hand, which is actually long-range staffing. So council, open to feedback or questions that you might have on specific positions proposed or timing or whatever direction you want to take it.
Well, I really appreciated the layout, a lot of detail, which I really appreciate. I gotta tell you though, the one that really shocked me was the code enforcement officer. Not a, well accepted that we pushed off that one, and so now to see it pushed off for 3 years kind of blows my mind. How is it going with the new ordinance and being able to respond, currently to complaints? I mean, it is complaint-based systems. Can you give me an update on just how that's going and why we think we can wait for 3 more years?
Sure. I think it's been a slow start this year, but they are getting the program in place. And if you look back by the dumpster, there's a bunch of advertising signs pulled. So I'm optimistic. Also, I will say that, perhaps your previous administrator just saw different priorities for the city than I do. Your next administrator may change it back again next year. So that's why we want to, it's only as good as the person making the recommendation, right? If you see something differently, please let us know. But I think if with what they've started and the help that Amanda has given, and again, to get that planning manager position in to make sure that there's somebody overseeing other folks who should be doing it, because it's a multi-position effort in order to respond to all the code enforcement issues. And then also, like I said, the CSO position, I think, helps that out. And so it's a number of those things that I'm hoping come together in just the right mix that we can push that out. I could be wrong. My crystal ball is foggy.
Couple different opinions.
And that, yeah. The planning, I want to mention this too. So I also wrote in there, and I'm sorry I didn't say it, but the planning manager, I would propose to be your airport manager. Because in my brief window of time here, other than a little bit of the financial with the lease rate stuff, I'm seeing things fall into 2 buckets. And one is kind of your maintenance and capital stuff. So your public works can do the maintenance. You've got Bolton and Mink to do your capital. And a lot of the other stuff is economic development, code enforcement related, which falls within the community development department. And so that's why I identified that position. If you were to choose to hire a consultant, for example, instead, maybe it's that person who manages that contract. But I forgot to mention that when I was going through it, so.
Can we talk a little bit more about the timing for patrol officer increases? So do we have 2 open, are we recruiting 2 open positions right now?
So right now, we have 2 vacancies, correct?
Conditional job offers out though, so they may be full.
Okay. Actively recruiting for. And then the plan would be 2 more in 2026? Is that right?
Yep. And once again, this is, as Christina had mentioned, it's such a moving, you just don't know. I mean, it's literally, sometimes it's, every 6 months, every year, things can change depending on calls. I mean, there are so many things that have changed with the calls for service that we respond to, and I know you're all very well aware of it. The mental health, and if you listen to my radio in one day, you'd be amazed in this county how many calls for service that we call it PIC. We even use this acronym now that I didn't even hear a year ago, and it's a person in crisis, and it's incredible. So some of these calls, Back in the day, 20 years ago, you always look at the calls for service. Now we're starting to look at what types of calls we're responding to and how long you're out on these calls, because they can take, some are very easy. You do a vehicle lockout, or there's a phone call, somebody just needs some direction. That might only take a few minutes, but then you also have some of those calls that take hours on end. So it's just projections. I know, believe me, I know it looks like a lot. Christine and I had a very candid conversation, and once again, I'm just trying to project
Fair.
and look to the future. That's
So
all.
let's break that down just a little bit. So right now, we do have we run with 2 officer minimums. Is that right?
Try to,
So,
try to have, perfect scenario, you want to have X amount out there, but when you look at vacation, sick, training, all these other things, some you can control, some you can't. But yeah, there's, once in a while, I hate saying how many are out there, but once in a while, there's, not as many as people think.
fair. And would this allow us, though, to get to a minimum of 3? And minimum of 3, meaning there's probably 4 scheduled, and if someone's on vacation, there's 3? Is that, okay. I like that, identifying that benchmark, because then you can decide, based on what's happening in calls for service, like, how are we moving that up?
And we do
can
look at
change over
scheduling
time.
and those types of things, because there are certain times of the day that we're much more busier, could be Monday through Friday type of a thing. There's a lot of people coming into town, shopping and visiting the lakes and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, there's other times where it's a little bit more quieter. There might be more serious calls very late at night or very early in the morning. But sometimes those calls can take much more longer to deal with. So we're constantly watching that. And calls for service, and I haven't sent it out to you yet, but we actually have it broken down on, and it's not always the same every given day, but there are more calls and spikes in different times of the day or on weekends.
You think that, so I noticed that the CSO officer is 2 part-time. Is there a place for us to, while we're kind of building into that additional 6 officer model over 10 years, is there a place for us to backfill that with more CSO support sooner, or more, instead of part-time, full-time? Is there a mix there that would make sense?
Yeah, so it really depends on the size of departments that are out there that I've looked at and researched. Very rarely do you have a CSO that is actually a full-time. And usually if they do in a certain department or a city, usually that CSO full-time is actually someone more or less overseeing, almost like a supervisor of the CSO program that might have 4 or 5 CSOs. In some departments that are quite large in the state have 14 or 18 CSO part-timers.
And because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is an important point, they're usually part-time because they're still in school. And so this is where the recruitment comes into place, because we've kind of got an eye on them before they're even finishing school and going out. Is that
Yep,
why they're
that is
part-time?
correct. Yep.
So,
Pipeline role.
If we
Yeah,
only had a crystal ball.
No,
that's-
and I appreciate between this and also the fire captain position, that's critical. The only thing that gives me pause of 6 officers over 10 years is we better start recruiting now. Like, it's a challenge, so. Other points of feedback?
So I guess I'm comfortable with the recommended 2025 positions at this point. I like, as far as the planning manager and airport manager, I can see where that makes some sense, especially in the code enforcement stuff, because we know we've got a lot of issues out there. The other thing that I'm welcome to see, because the previous 2 airport managers, my understanding was basically volunteered, and the last one, Dan Undum, there was none of his time was set aside and pulled from the airport fund. So the idea that at least we're being transparent and that money is coming from the airport fund is important. So I
yeah, and
appreciate
that's
that.
shown under the fiscal impact section.
Yes.
If you see that 36,000 is 25% of that planning manager's time. Up for discussion, we needed to pull something to start.
Any other points of feedback? I think these conversations are always, the devil's always in the details when we have, full numbers put together. So, but I think as far as like initial plan, this looks like a good starting spot.
Yeah, obviously, we understand as you go through the budgeting process, well, things will have to adjust and whatnot, but we just needed a starting place, so appreciate that.
Yeah, and I just want to say real quick, I appreciate the planning, because just thinking back to when we didn't have the 10-year budget or this, and it was a whole different world of planning a budget then, having a conversation, even getting asked questions of, hey, when is this street going to get worked on, or when is this park maintenance going to get worked on, or any of that. There was no plan to look at. And so when we got the budget, that was amazing. And then even now moving on to this, it's, it might not be, if only it could be a yes for everything, but it comes with the timing and the planning and the budget. But it's like, as long as we have a plan to get started, it is so appreciated from our perspective, and I can only imagine how helpful it is for staff.
Very good. Any other points on this topic? Christina, anything else you need from us? All right. Moving on to our last discussion item, which is a consideration of future work session items. Christina, do you just want to walk us through this?
Sure. So Mayor and Council, this is a new communication tool or process, if you will. Just keep the council updated on all the requests that I've been tracking that I've been heard, whether it be from council, from staff, from the public, about possible work session items. And so I printed out copies up there for you of I think it was 24, 28 items. You don't have to provide feedback, but certainly if you want to help us prioritize this. Otherwise, I'm kind of tackling it in the order that it came in, unless things get raised up for some other level. So mainly a communications tool, but open to feedback from any of you on this. And we will plan to do this at every monthly work session, right, Mayor? Just to keep you all updated on it, so.
I think, so Christina and I meet weekly to kind of go through agendas and do future agenda planning, and needed to develop something like this. And then from time to time, somebody will ask a question on, hey, we talked about that, where is that? And so this is just a way of tracking back on, where are we on, what we had talked about with, back in January on UTV and ATV. And you can see that, we're kind of in process. And certainly what's coming up for future agendas is always kind of the near-term focus, but then starting to understand what's already in pipeline and what might be coming back to us is also part of consideration. So always happy to hear feedback of things that should be on this list or things that should not be on this list. And just know that, it's kind of what Christina's using to work off of from a, kind of making sure we're keeping all of the plates spinning and all of the balls in the air. So I think having this be part of this meeting, at least just distributed before this meeting each month, we may or may not talk about it, but at least everyone has an opportunity to see and can provide some feedback. So any initial reactions or thoughts?
I just appreciate the whole list. It's, I know we talk about a lot of things, but to see it all on one page, it's like, wow.
Now you know why we need all that staff.
Okay, that is the end of our planned agenda for this evening. Quick welcome back to Jolene. We're so glad you're here and glad to have you back on board.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to get to work.
Very good. And that is the end of our, being the end of our planned work session. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? And we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.